Okay, so what we saw from the last presentation is that the date of posting, the way the actual stuff is formatted there, is not probably as good as we would like. Okay, so what we're going to do now is to remove that thing by just simply changing the formatting. And the way that does that is quite simple. If you go into the grid view and you click on the Add Edit Columns section, you can actually click on the date of posting, and if you go down the page, you see a little slot here called data format string. Here is where you can actually tell the kind of ASP.NET how you want that data to be formatted or seen by the user. So, and the way the syntax it has is something like this: you have a squiggly bracket and followed by a kind of a number which represents, if you like, which portion of the array. So for example, some data might be sending back sort of like data in 2 or 3 elements. In our case, that is true. We've got sort of one element is the date and one element is the time. So by saying the data format string here, we're saying for the very first element, if you like, the 0 in the array, I want the data to be formatted like this: the day, the month, and the year with four letters. So if I click on that and click OK, now you see it looks a bit different, 29/11/2009. And when I actually play it, you will also see that the date is formatted without the time string at the end appearing. Okay, so if we just let that appear, I mean, you'll have to look up yourself. As you see now, it's much tidier. There's no time written in. I say you'll look up yourself. There's the various kinds of alternate ways of doing this. I mean, if we wanted to make that, for example, appear for American time, you would do something like this: edit the columns, date of posting, and again, so instead of DDMMYY, you would put it the other way around. So you'd have sort of like, oh, let me just get rid of that. So MMDDYYYY, such that you would have something like that. Okay, click OK, and then just 11/29/2009, and now it's in a format to be understood in the United States. And obviously you could put some logic into your page, finding out where the user is from and displaying the date in the appropriate form for that particular regional zone. Okay, so there we got. Now it's kind of like appearing in kind of more American way of doing things. So that's, if you like, that's ways of formatting the data. Another thing to do, however, is also we can do things like allow the columns to be used by clicked on to actually sort the data. And this again is another very easy and simple thing to be done with the grid view. Click enable sorting. Okay. The moment you do that, you get lines appear under the column headings, which means that the user can click on those lines to actually get towards the data in the way they want. So if I play this, what will happen is the page will appear, but with kind of lines at the top underneath the headings, which allow me to sort the data based on that heading. So if I click on title, I can change the order. There's the body. I've changed the order. There's only one username, so that won't change the order. Date of posting, that orders it by the time they were posted. So that's another very useful and a very handy feature that's built into the grid view. It makes it very, very easy to use. Okay. The other thing that you would definitely want to be able to do, especially in this case of, for example, of when we're trying to find, say, for example, of abusive posts, you would want to be able to select certain rows of data. So if you then go back into the grid view again, if we choose enable selection, okay, that will allow us to select certain of the rows based on just by clicking the select button, which you see is being placed on the left hand side of the grid view. So now if I show the grid view, what will happen is I can click on select and that will highlight that particular row. Okay, so you know which row is being highlighted. The text is going bold, and again, without typing in any code at all, we've added quite significant functionality now, the ability to select a particular row of the database. So we're not actually doing anything with it at the moment, but that's going to come later. Okay, and finally, there is the ability to page the data. Now, we've only got 4 records in our database at the moment, and so it's really And what paging is to actually see the data, but only say 10 records at a time or 20 records at a time. Okay, and then the user presses forward to actually go to the next set of uh, data. But if we click on enable paging here, you will see here 1, 2, okay, and that will sort of like if ever we go above 10 records, then the user will be able to go click on 2 to actually go to the next set of records. Okay, I'd say we're in the moment we've only got 4 records in the database at the moment, so it's not necessarily going to be any much use at the moment. But that is what anyway. Those are all the things you can do very very easily in ASP.NET. You don't even have to edit a line of code to bring in this sort of functionality. Okay, so this is one of the very very powerful features of the grid view. Having introduced selection, one thing we probably don't want anymore is the body to appear. I mean, because I've only put in very small messages into this system so far, all the messages are only really one line. But if they're more than one line, then the kind of like the depth, or sorry, the height of these rows would become much larger, because the body would contain a lot of text. So it might be at this point worth getting rid of the body. Again, it's very very simple. All we have to do is click on edit columns, remove the body. Okay, and then we don't have any body here, and so all we have is a list of titles. Okay, so that's the second part of the grid view. I've covered now most of the very very simple features of the grid view which don't require any coding. Next we'll be looking at more sophisticated ways to extend the grid view.